hope you are all having a good day. Welcome, Emma. I can hear you. I was just getting an error from Discord saying that my mic was not working, so it's good that you guys can hear me. Apparently, it was a false error. That's great. How are you, Emma? Having a good day? How are things on your end?
Oh, I'm having a very good day.
Love to hear it.
Things on my end are proceeding. I am very focused.
Oh, I'm liking the very slick hairstyle and mustache. Very nice.
Yeah. I had to indulge my significant other who was at the same time becoming a little tired with the Santa Claus look, and at the same time she started to watch Better Call Saul. So she told me that I should look like Lalo Salamanca, who's her one of the characters and her main point of attraction. So I thought, well, you know what, let's see how it goes.
Well, it looks good on you. So it's very smooth, nice. And you know what they say: happy wife, happy life. So it's always easier that way. Well, it's also a beautiful day because we did we did post the article about Dusk evolution to multi-layer modular architecture. So that was very exciting to see, and it answers quite a lot of questions from a lot of the community, as well as brings in new ones. But we'll get to that in a bit.
Definitely. I mean, that's where we are here. I know that I promised last week that that probably Hein was going to take this one, but I forgot that Hein is at the moment is having a brief vacation. So thank you. Looking smooth. Nice. I can if I would get enough votes, then I will keep this. I will keep this look. Let me put it that way. Why shouldn't we have a DAO for at least for hairstyle?
Nice. Let's have a poll on that. We did see that the team was actually very recently in London yesterday. Hein was there as well. Is there anything you can tell us about that? I assume some interesting conversation were happening over there.
I am not going to say anything about what happened in London yesterday. It will become very clear very, very soon why we went there. And the only thing that I can tell everybody is the fact that no one here, not even me, not even Dusk, actually has enough Dusk.
Ooh, you heard it here first, guys. I know what I'm doing after this. This AMA ends.
I have never been so bullish in my entire life on a project. It doesn't matter Dusk or anything else. Godfather look, wow. Well, certainly not the kind of image that I really would like to project, but well, thank you, I suppose. But yes, it's of course I cannot, I cannot foresee anything. I cannot forecast market movements, this kind of stuff. I'm talking about from a pure business development point of view, but I can say that we yesterday. Well, it's not really yesterday because it was the trip to London of a significant amount of our team was a stepping stone into the accomplishment of our program, but and something that I have been personally working on for quite a while, for some months already. And again, I am very sorry that I am not able to disclose much more than this. But yesterday we laid the ground for for a significant part of our ecosystem to be ignited in a short amount of period. So I am very satisfied with how things went. Of course, there is, between an intent, an agreement, if you will, or execution, there is always a gap that requires focus, requires attention, requires efforts. But we are on the right. We are absolutely on the right track. I am very satisfied with the latest development. Not only for stuff that happened in London yesterday, but I would say the last week has been particularly fruitful for us. And I won't say more than this. I am sorry if you guys take this as a sort of an announcement of an announcement. It's really not my intention to create empty hype or reassure anyone. I have nothing to reassure you of. I am sincerely happy and sincerely enthusiastic about what I have seen and what we are working on. This, of course, doesn't immediately translate into promise of wealth for everyone, or God forbid, Facebook level partnership or this kind of bullshit that have been floating around in the past. That's not what I intend to say here. My goal is basically to deliver the entirety of the vision of Dusk. And last 2-3 weeks have been, since I would say since the dinner that we had in Amsterdam with 21X, I am quite satisfied on how things are going from the perspective of basically realizing our vision and delivering basically the applications, the asset, the ecosystem that we set out to deliver and to create since already 2018. And it has been quite a ride so far, and I want to express my gratitude for everybody that stuck with us through hype and crashes and weird token prices, delays, missing promises, this kind of stuff. But it seems like we're getting there, and I for one I think I've never been so optimistic. Again, sorry about me being optimistic. I mean, it might create the wrong expectation, but I am, and I'm also quite spontaneous in my in how I approach the community. So when I am angry, you guys see it. When I am pissed, you guys see it. When I am a little thoughtful, and tired, you guys see it. And when I'm happy, you should see it too. And right now, it's a moment in which I am very, very hopeful and optimistic.
100%.
That said, let's take on some of the questions.
Yes, and it's great to see these little nuggets and showing your optimism about everything that you've been building for the past many years, and finally getting to see it almost come to fruition, right?
Yeah, but it's not only me. We have been building these things all together. To be honest, I mean, without the support of the community, we would not be where we are at the moment. And it's this is a concerted effort.
100%.
Anyways, fire away.
Let's go. Okay. Without further ado, let's get into the questions. So the first one is around the MIPS powered pre-verifier. So some people don't really understand what that actually means. And could you give us a small explanation of what the MIPS powered pre-verifier actually are? And how we're using it?
We are getting into a territory which I am not entirely familiar with, because because the MIPS is something that we are inheriting from the optimism stack. However, forgive any kind of inaccuracies, but essentially the capability for a layer 2, for an optimistic layer 2, to check whether the sequencers, so these nodes that essentially collect and execute transactions on the layer 2. So in order to prevent the sequencers to attack the network in any way by providing false data or manipulating transaction, these kind of things, then essentially there is in current optimism there are 7 days in which the state transition can be challenged by somebody else, by anyone. And in order to do so, then the challenge also needs to provide a proof that in fact the state transition is incorrect and that the sequencer has been posting a wrong state transition to the layer 1. In order to create this proof, then the optimism team use something which is called MIPS, which essentially provides some kind of formal proof that of correctness of the overall state root. So a MIPS does not exactly execute transaction, but essentially is capable of testing the correctness of the state root at the end of a certain transaction without executing the transaction itself. This is enough to prove the correctness of a certain state transition. Now, the Ethereum does not, and this is the great advantage of actually having a grasp on or having control over the stack at the data and settlement layer. So since Ethereum is an optimism, they are two completely different projects, then Ethereum does not enshrine the layer 2, does not enshrine optimism. It treats it like any other kind of layer 2. And therefore, it does not use MIPS, is completely unaware of MIPS. It is completely unaware of other kind of layer 2 that do use, for instance, zero knowledge virtual machines, or a circuitized virtual machine in order basically to prove that certain operations have been done correctly using succinct proofs or any other methodology, and therefore Ethereum is completely ignorant of those proofs. But we are not. We can choose basically to embed inside of our data and settlement node, which basically is Rask, certain operations so that the provisioner, so the block generator, when it is presented with the so-called block transaction, which essentially is the data posted by either Dusk EVM or in the future Dusk VM, but at this particular point in time, Dusk EVM, it is aware of the state transition. It is aware of this MIPS MIPS proof, which is done using, if memory serves, something called Canon. And it can, in fact, reject the state transition by verifying or by adding in what is called the pre-verification also the MIPS proof. And this is something that makes sure that we do not have to wait for a certain period for anyone to challenge that thing, because it is essentially the sequencer that sort of challenges itself. And the proof is also part of the data availability, so anybody can verify it. The proof is also quite, it is quite efficient to be created, and is going to be included in all the different kind of state transitions. So because of that, then we avoid this overall 7 days challenge before settling something, and instead we do accept or not the state transition from Dusk EVM through mean of simply executing a succinct proof, together with the so-called blob transaction, which essentially is the EIP 4844 standard from Ethereum, which is proto-dunk sharding. I hope that this makes it clearer.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so too. That was for, I hope it does make it much clearer for those that are, not so necessarily technically inclined.
Okay, so let's simplify it, right? So if you are uncomfortable with my answer, then it means that somebody else might too. So let's simplify it even more. Let's say, for instance, that I am running a certain particular software. Then this software does not have certain capabilities, right? Why? Because it is getting calls from a lot of different other software. So it is. I have a server. This server is called by process A, process B, process C, process D, for instance. These processes, A, B, C, and D, they all use different kind of methodology to tell this server that what they are doing is correct. And therefore, the server cannot really, since A, B, C, and D are using 4 different kind of methodologies, the server cannot really ascertain whether what they post is correct or not, right? And then the server, the role of this hypothetical server is to have as many processes as possible, 10, 50, 100, right? And who knows in the future what kind of proof of correctness these processes will be able to provide. So in order to an engineer that has to plan for this server that provides these services to these kind of processes, doesn't matter what these services are, then essentially cannot make any assumption on how the processes are going to prove the correctness of what they are doing. For instance, database. You can basically put on a database, you can put numbers, you can put text, you can put emails, you can put JPEGs, you can put whatever you want on a database, right? The database will say, oh, I don't know, nor I care whether the JPEG that you are actually storing is corrupted or not. I don't care whether the numbers that you're storing right now follow any particular logic or not. If you are storing Fibonacci number and then suddenly you store 9, which is not part of the Fibonacci sequence, then essentially the database doesn't really say anything. So why? Because the database is generic, is generalist. Ethereum is generic. It wants to have as many layer 2s on top of it as possible. So it cannot make any assumption on how to prove the correctness of this layer 2. It doesn't care. It makes money by storing the data from the layer 2, whether it is correct or not. Because of that, it is up to the process to prove to its own users the correctness of what it does, right? And in the case of optimism, one very efficient way that they found was to say, I am the sequencer, I post something, my transaction, and then I will let other nodes challenge those transactions, challenge those state transition by proving that, using MIPS, that this state transition is not correct. And if they can prove it, then I will lose my stake. This is how Optimist does it. In our case, we don't have a generic database. Dusk is not only Dusk data and settlement, it is also Dusk application layer, so Dusk EVM. So it is in the interest of Dusk data and settlement to know whether Dusk EVM is actually posting correct or incorrect stuff. Why? Because it is specific, because this Dusk EVM process is enshrined. There are not going to be other processes other than Dusk VM, of course, but there are not going to be other processes. There is only going to be, for the EVM compatibility layer and application layer, Dusk EVM. So we chose to embed inside of Dusk data and settlement, which Ethereum doesn't do, basically some a canonical way to ascertain the correctness of the state transition. Hence, is no longer needed this 7-day challenge, which normally would be the responsibility of Dusk EVM. It is Dusk DS that in fact is ascertaining that the correctness of what Dusk EVM is posting. Is this clear?
Right. Yeah, that's quite clear to me now. At least, and I'm not a technical person, so if I understood it, I think most people would. Great.
All right.
Next question would be around Lumos. So Lumos is helping us with Dusk EVM, the bridge, but some people are also asking what type of starter application is Lumos helping us with?
They are not working on application. They are working on infrastructure. They are not helping with any applications.
Okay, so because I believe in the article today we mentioned that they're helping us with staking and just mentioned starter applications, but maybe
indeed, but these are no applications. So staking, for instance, is basically an operation that pertains to the utility of Dusk DS. So Dusk DS, what does it do? The data and settlement layer essentially just provides the consensus, so the decentralization part, and it provides data availability for the application layer. So it makes sure that the application can run on top of an infrastructure. The infrastructure basically provides security. It provides data availability so that all the different kind of clients can in fact catch up and can verify that that the application layer, the various applications that are deployed on top of Dusk, they are doing its job correctly. Now, in order to do its job, Dusk DS primarily the consensus, the data availability, and initially also the PyCrust and Phoenix execution layer. In order to do its job correctly, then it basically needs to power the staking, because proof of stake is basically our Sybil resistant mechanism, and therefore staking is part of the infrastructure rather than part of or being an application deployed on top of Dusk, and hence basically deployed on the application layer.
Right. So it's more so they are helping us with
thing. The bridge, same thing, because basically Dusk DS and Dusk EVM, they will have they will work with Dusk tokens, right? But the aspect or the technology or the protocol of Dusk, which is essentially just one token, but it is embodied in a different way. It is implemented in a different way on Dusk DS and is implemented on Dusk EVM in a different way. On Dusk EVM is going to be sort of an ERC20. Why? Because the EVM works with ERC20 and those kind of tokens, whereas on Dusk DS is basically what right now we call it native Dusk. So the bridge is also part of the infrastructure to make sure that basically the value of Dusk stays exactly the same, and it can move across all the different layers, so Dusk EVM, Dusk VM, and Dusk DS freely. So the bridge is part of the infrastructure too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks for the clarification, Emma. Now, on top, except Dusk EVM, what are the key things that need to launch before trading securities on the NPEX DApp? And are there any regulatory or technical barriers right now?
There are no regulatory barriers. The only thing that we need is Dusk EVM. That's practically the only prerequisite in order to launch NPEX application that in fact will embed securities. Now, the interesting thing is that we are not obviously we're going to launch the Ampex application, which internally we are calling stocks with an X. But the interesting fact is basically the fact that by launching Ampex application, we are not only going to launch the Ampex application, we are also going to launch assets. These assets, considering that they are deployed on a protocol, on an application layer like Dusk EVM, they are going to transcend the confines of a single application. So they can be used by multiple parties, the same kind of assets, in respect of the composability characteristic of a DeFi application. Now, when we're talking about regulatory boundaries, then we are talking about the capability of compose and the capability of investing and owning and self-custody also securities, right? Now, the overall Dusk EVM, you can think of it as being under the wing of Ampex, and therefore Ampex extends its overall license, whether it is broker license, MTF license, or whatnot, to the entirety of the applications that are there. However, if you are a user, then in order to access securities, then you need to do KYC with Ampex, and we will make sure that basically you do KYC only once, and then you can do whatever you want on the EVM. By and large, it's basically just one-off operation, but it is still required by law, because otherwise you cannot trade securities. We cannot allow people to do it in a permissionless way. However, one thing that we can do is also to create wrapped assets on top of these securities, and these wrapped assets will be independent, backed by, but independent from the securities themselves, and therefore these kind of assets will be able to be traded freely in a decentralized fashion and in a permissionless fashion, even without KYC. For instance, let's say that, for example, if we are going to create an asset backed by bonds or other kind of securities, then these assets, when it is backed by these securities themselves, and therefore it's redeemable against these securities, right? Against these bonds. But if we basically wrap this asset so that it cannot be converted directly to the security, but can only be converted or unwrapped by, if you do the KYC, then essentially this wrapped version, it can be freely used, although it is basically, technically it is still backed by the securities, only it is wrapped. So this is a way in which we can do, we can provide composability with in a permissionless way. Although in order to redeem the asset for the underlying, you still need to do KYC. But again, you might not do that. This is, it is the equivalent of basically trading USDT or USDC. You know that you can redeem it at Circle or at Tether, but nobody does that. Everybody is trading USDC and USDT like it is the underlying USD asset that can be redeemed at Tether or at Circle. In the same way, we are going to do the same thing, but with security-backed assets.
That's very interesting. I wasn't aware of that opportunity, so that's really exciting that you were going to be able to include that. The next question is an interesting one. If you were the CEO of a central exchange like Coinbase or Binance, what is stopping you from building apps on Dusk to allow your user base to be able to trade stocks on chain compliantly after it starts trading on the NPEX app?
I would say a subpoena from various regulatory bodies. In order to trade securities, then you need a license, right? If you don't have that license, then you are breaching the law. You are basically just doing something illegal, and so and neither Coinbase nor Binance has a license to trade securities. What they can do is they can create applications on top of Dusk. They can onboard their users on NPEX, and then at that particular point in time, they might actually just profit in some form from from intermediating these things. But this means essentially surrendering their users to NPEX. And they might have a kickback or something like that, but they will never do that. Why would they? They are making banks by essentially just trading crypto. And if they want to extend trading to the securities, at the moment they cannot do it directly. They have to onboard their users somewhere else. The only other way how they could do that without having an MTF license would be by having a broker license. In that case, they, as in Binance or Coinbase, would be clients of MPEX, redirecting orders of their own customers, their own investors to MPEX itself or any other MTF. But they need to have a broker license too, which is again not really a very easy to obtain license. For instance, very well known institutions like Archax, for instance, in the UK, they have a direct connection with BlackRock, with Aberdeen, with Vanguard, with practically all these money market funds. So they are, quite a renowned institution, and they basically have been pursuing the broker license in order to offer these products to Europe, to European customers. But so far they haven't been able to obtain this license from the regulators. So as you can see, it's not really something very easy to get. And the fact that MPEX does have a broker license and an MTF license and the ECSP license too, then it's it is an asset that basically just makes our symbiotic partnership the absolute number one USP for us.
100%. And with the DLT TSS on, in progress, it's going to be like the holy trifecta or holy of licenses that you can have in the EU. And being a partner of Dusk, that just makes us inherit all of these benefits. It's amazing. Okay, the next one goes into, so in terms of brokering assets from other exchanges, what's the process for onboarding them? Does each one require individual negotiations? If so, what is the value proposition that makes these exchanges like 21X say yes?
So all these all kind of venues that we that onboard us plus MPEX as their broker, they have their own policy. Although whether they are in the EU, in UK, in US, somewhere else, it doesn't really matter. Especially in the EU, I mean, you can think that there are some regulations that are in fact harmonized across all the different kind of states, all the different kind of countries in the union. But the reality is that each country has its own set of laws, and of course they are harmonized with each other, but policies really are different, a lot different, to the point in which, for instance, in Germany, you have a license that essentially allows you to tokenize assets or to do something with tokenized assets, tokenized securities, in fact, which is even parallel to the DLT-TSS. So each venue that we talk to, they have their own different policies, and they have their own kind of business model. Now, what we see over and over again is that when we are talking about established players, then normally the established players they have quite some quite some vast different kind of business models, and that go from B2C to B2B to B2B2C. And normally we want to deal with these kind of venues in a B2B fashion. In other cases, like for example, those are the most mindful of regulations, policies, things move very, very slowly, big banks, this kind of stuff. Then you have the 21X of this world that are relatively new, and they are fresh out of their license process, and in some cases they don't even have a working product. Those are more interested in basically keeping a B2B to X model, in which they try to attract other kind of businesses that have retail investors, so that they create pipelines of different kind of assets. And this is basically how we approach them, how we have been establishing our partnership. Essentially, they want to have a partner. They don't immediately gather their own assets, whatever kind of assets, again, bonds, money market fund, equity, stocks, whatever they are. They do not basically offer them to retail. They offer them to asset managers or to brokers or to transfer agents, all these different kind of institutions that then they have their own retail investors or even institutional investors, but basically they cater to retail clients, and that is the basis on how we normally approach this kind of partnership. We go there and we say, well, through MPEX we have a broker license, and therefore we can reroute orders from our own investors to your venue in order to execute these trades. Now, in our case, it's not only the MPEX investors, but also Dusk users that by onboarding Dusk EVM through an MPEX DApp, essentially they under the hood become also MPEX customers, so to speak, or MPEX investors, although no one will ever have to deal with MPEX directly. And therefore, they will have the opportunity to basically access these assets, which normally are only reserved to big institutional investors, in a way in which basically we can offer them with a much more convenient in a more convenient way, because these assets can be fractionalized, right? So you do not really need to buy 100k euros of a money market fund, because otherwise you do not meet the minimum required volume. You can buy 1,000 euros of it. Same thing for Eurobond, US Treasury, and whatnot. All the different kind of assets that are on these venues. So this is how we make it work, and this is also how other protocols, for instance, even if they are much bigger than Dusk, like Hedera, like Polygon, like whatever, They don't do that. They cannot do that because they don't have a broker license, right? So that they cannot, 21x is not allowed even to offer assets to Polygon users. It needs basically to offer these assets to somebody, another institution that has got a broker license, and then this broker license need to basically just onboard somehow users from Polygon. But there is no interest from Polygon to just redirect users to this application, because this application is not part of Polygon, and Polygon is not really the owner of that application, right? Whereas in our case, basically because of the symbiotic partnership that we have with Ampex, then we can definitely do that. So all the different kind of clients or venues or asset managers that collaborate with Ampex, we immediately open it to our users and to other developers and to other assets. That's why basically on Dusk EVM, any kind of asset that is there, it is immediately available to everyone. It is in our own interest, because the more assets are there, the more applications are there, they use these assets, the more transaction over the network, the more TVL. Not only that, we can also go beyond that. We can actually just make applications to a lot of different other protocols, like on Polygon, for instance, or on Ethereum, or anything like that, where users buy these assets on Polygon, and these assets are actually created on Dusk network. So somebody pays using USDC from Polygon, and then we create the asset, we tokenize the asset on Dusk, and then we make it claimable only if this user go on Dusk. And if they never go on Dusk, it doesn't matter. These assets are on Dusk. So that's how we win. We essentially just centralize the TVL on Dusk and Dusk EVM, while liquidity can come from anywhere, even Bitcoin. I don't care.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that it really explains, again, how important the broker license is, for example, in these negotiations and in these partnerships. Amazing. Thank you for that explanation, Emma. The next one would be, so what are technical and regulatory milestones? What other technical and regulatory milestones remain before we can see on-chain ETF trading? Is the DLT TSS license a prerequisite of hosting ETFs?
No, it's not. It's not the DLT TSS is not a prerequisite. So for what concern ETFs, right, and for what concern also this kind of a complex product, the main challenge is basically to let me put it this way: if this product would be created, for instance, on the Ampex venue directly on the MTF, they would be immediately available to our user through Dusk EVM. There is nothing different. They are securities. There's nothing different compared to bonds, compared to all these different other assets. However, ETFs normally are very liquid. They are quite big, and we do not have the user base to be very appealing for an ETF to actually create its own asset directly on Ampex. So one way that we can work around that is with the broker license. For instance, using the broker license, the ETFs can be created on any other venue, and then we can create orders and route these orders to the venues. Of course, if these venues they work with tokenized assets, it's much easier, because Ampex does not have the whole infrastructure, for instance, at the moment, just to onboard, Deutsche Bank. We have the license, but onboarding Deutsche Bank, for instance, or the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, or Borsa Italiana, or these kind of big venues, they require quite a substantial infrastructure that is deployed there, and we will get there. But at the moment, I don't want to keep working on boilerplate on infrastructure. We will do that in the future, but at the moment, it's much better. It's much easier for us to get things that are already tokenized somehow, and to deal with this kind of venues, or sometimes even just do broker to broker deals, for example. Why? Because broker to broker, these other brokers already have the infrastructure, and we can simply just pull out assets using their infrastructure, which is a little easier for us. Let me put it that way. So for what concerns ETFs, if we find these ETFs somewhere else, then we can basically bring it to the through the broker dealer. But the way to tokenize that ourselves, it goes through two different pathways. One is the DLT TSS, and the other one is what we call the hybrid model. Why? What is the hurdle there? Well, normally, in order to get assets, get securities to a venue, like an MTF, like Ampex, for instance, you have to have a way that these securities can be transferred from somewhere where they are created or where they are kept to the venue itself. In order to do so, then you need a way to transfer these securities. Normally, security transfer happens on the central bank system, which is called T2S, Trading 2 System. So those that have an account or those that have access to T2S can transfer security to each other. Normally, the only ones that have an account at T2S are CSDs and clearinghouses. Why? Because you need essentially to do the transaction security versus payment, and therefore both the payment, so the cash, and the securities need to reside on a system that has visibility over the two. When you are just moving securities, then you do a security transaction for zero cash, essentially, but it's the same thing. So normally you do that through a CSD. Now, the CSD that we use at Ampex and that we interface with is Euroclear. At the moment, we have a closed account at Euroclear, but we are working in order basically to get access directly to T2S system. With access to T2S, essentially, we can have everything that the DLT TSS provides us with, except the capability of storing the securities directly on the DLT, but that doesn't matter because the DLT would essentially just interface with this T2S system. And we would also bypass and work around a lot of different limitations that the DLT TSS has. Instead, the DLT TSS allows essentially the same thing, but there is no T2S on the back. Essentially, the DLT becomes this T2S system. It is more limited because a DLT is not directly connected to a lot of different other venues like T2S, because T2S is again a central bank system that is connected to all the different kind of CSDs in Europe and beyond. So if you have an account at T2S, you can essentially just receive securities from everywhere. This is what we call the hybrid model. So our capability of basically connecting to T2S through Ampex and using the DLT as an interface toward T2S. So nobody sees the T2S system, everybody sees the DLT. By tokenizing or by issuing asset on the DLT, under the hood, we save them or we transfer them or we store them at T2S on a security account. We also do all the different kind of cash-related operations that security is related to, like, for instance, bond coupon payments or dividend payments, or in the case of ETFs, for instance, rebalancing. And at that particular point in time, we are capable of actually, from Ampex, meaning Dusk, we are also capable of getting these securities from somewhere, wherever it is. At the moment, in order for us to get this security, is a little bit of a hurdle. So in order to do so, then normally we have to use SPVs, special purpose vehicle, meaning funds. So we need to create a fund in MPEX that has these securities in it. And then at that particular point in time, it's not exactly that we have the securities in our CSD, but we essentially have a fund that has as underlying basically the securities. So that is more or less how it works. So for ETFs, this is way more important because the capability of transferring these ETFs on different kind of venues is very, very important, because ETFs are normally traded a lot more than bonds, for instance, and even in some cases even more than stocks and equities. So because of that, then you need to have an exchange which has quite a lot of volume, or you need essentially to be able to move securities back and forth from your own exchange or your own MTF somewhere else. So this is what is needed in order to get ETFs on Dusk. We need to deliver on the hybrid model, hence having an account at T2S. We are working on it. It's in progress. It's going to happen. Or the DLT TSS license, which most likely is going to happen afterwards.
Got it. I think that's a pretty good explanation of understanding the whole process and everything that still needs to happen to get there. The next question is more around the Dusk token utility, and someone is asking, given that Dusk drastically reduces institutional operating costs, could excessively low gas fees lead to insufficient demand for Dusk tokens to maintain strong utility?
No. So there are two different things. Dusk is gas, right? So what you already see, what you will see immediately, as soon as basically we have the application, is the fact that the overall, every single kind of operation that we are currently doing on an exchange is suddenly going to be executed on the application layer, and it's going to also be executed on the Dusk DS layer 2, which means essentially that all these operations, they cost gas, right? So you have to, and the fact that we are going to do them in a more kind of decentralized, although not completely permissionless, because there is this KYC part still, and we need to, in order to trade securities, there is no work around that. But still, we want to do it in a decentralized fashion. We want to have a DEX, for instance. We want to have users that provide liquidity to it. So all the different kind of operation of trading, whether it is trading the security itself or trading the wrapped assets, still requires gas. Together with that, there is also the fact that the utility of Dusk itself is going to be, it will keep being linked to staking. It will be kept linked to a lot of different other utilities too. The part that gives us a lot of different a lot of different value for what concerns the token itself is also the capability of having TVL. But this is inherent to a security, because essentially a security in various form is essentially liquidity, is essentially cash, right? And in order to move it, whether you are redeeming it or whether you are profiting from it or whether you are creating, then you still need gas. You still do need that kind of utility. And the more venue, the more brokerage we do, the more assets there are, the more gas is going to be. Essentially, because we are moving more and more all the operations from the exchange itself, from MPEX itself, but also from all the other venues that we collaborate with on chain. So essentially, there is only going to be more and more demand together with that, we can also use Dusk as a the underlying Dusk as part of a collateral. We can also do basket of different kind of systems. And finally, remember that those assets that will be created directly on chain at some point, using, for instance, the DLT TSS when we will have it, or initially the crowdfunding license of MPEX, or creating the asset itself, is still going to require putting aside an amount of Dusk as a security deposit. Same thing for what concern other kind of initiatives that we are studying. I mean, for example, we can provide a different kind of coupon payment depending on how much Dusk somebody has got at stake. That is also another utility of Dusk network. Of Dusk token. So I don't see basically the utility going down. If anything, is going up and perhaps also incrementing. But again, we need assets on the network in order to verify that my expectation is right or wrong.
Right. Yeah. So the more assets and the more apps on the network, the more utility Dusk is only going to have going forward. And the last question would be, and this is an interesting one, while Dusk is trying to disrupt TradFi with a technology that is going to put out a lot of people out of a job, potentially disrupting monopolistic TradFi entities who profit from opaque fees and slow processes, do you expect coordinated resistance from established financial entities, and how is Dusk preparing to overcome these challenges?
So I don't think that there is going to be a lot of disruption of jobs. So, okay, let me tell you why am I doing all of this? Why Dusk exists ultimately, right? Because it's nice that to create basically a protocol, a network, a product, system, infrastructure, whatever you want to call it, so that people can, so that we can have normal people run part of this infrastructure by participating in Dusk DS. That is the vision of Dusk. But another reason, which is very, very much connected to it, but it is part of the demand, because you have a supply, which is us basically running infrastructure. That is part of a supply, right? We are supplying the infrastructure. But there is also a part that has got to do with demand, and the demand is also as important as the supply. What is this demand? Why Dusk exists on the side of the demand? Is because the capability to supply financing and capital to the real businesses, to the real organizations that are actually part of the economic tissue of a country, are those organizations that essentially are SMEs, mid organizations, so big organizations that need capital to grow. There is no capital, fluid capital, in Europe compared to other countries, compared to the US, for instance, or compared even to Asia. If you have a business, a successful business, then in order to get finance, you go to a bank. That's basically what you do. You go to a bank, you go to other kind of institutions. You go to this kind of behemoths that take months to take a decision, that normally undercut everybody else from profiting from this. And capital is at the same time fragmented and held at few different places. And these few different places, basically, they have control over this capital. And they supply it, but they supply it for themselves, right? I want to make it absolutely easy for any kind of business to have an alternative way to actually access to finance. And not only, the big financial corporation that are basically just 2 or 3% of the economy of a country. I want this to be spread all over the place. If you want to open up an ice cream shop and you have a good idea, I want you to be able to get financing from somebody else or from a community that supply this kind of capital and basically get something from it. We had a spaces some time ago with a company that we are also going to work with that does invoice financing, right? Invoice financing, why should it be a prerogative of banks? It should, anybody should be able to provide this kind of liquidity. Now you can do that in a centralized fashion, and therefore basically you are just wasting away a lot of this capital, because normally this kind of crowdfunding institutions, they profit from a percentage of the capital that is involved there, or you do it in a decentralized fashion. And in order to do so, then you have not only to attract liquidity and to attract capital, but you also do need to be able to compose this capital, because at some point, these kind of organizations, they provide ROIs, and they provide ROIs to those that supply this capital, right? So we want to do something on the demand, for the demand, and that's basically what we want. What we want to do is not only about just helping some institutions to save money blindly. Of course, we want to do that. That's basically the supply part. We want to supply infrastructure so that any kind of institution essentially has more ammunition to help out everybody else. But ultimately, I want to decentralize finance. And finance means financing opportunities. And that's what I really would like to do. That's basically what part of the vision behind Dusk, or the mission behind Dusk, is for, right? So that's basically that is the reason why we are doing all of this. Now I lost a little bit my train of thought. So what was the question again?
Was basically, the question was, if since we are helping a lot of companies cut costs drastically, and we are also removing middlemen, will there be kind of like a coordinated resistance from certain financial entities, aka the middlemen we're trying to get rid of, to stop Dusk? And how are we?
So the short answer is no. There isn't really such a resistance. Essentially, all the financing institution, they see the supply side, right? They don't really, they are already on the demand side. Somehow they already supply capital to organizations somehow, whether through asset management companies and organization, or directly because they are banking system or crowdfunding partners. But they are all focused and attracted to the supply part, to the cost decreasing part, to the capability basically of accessing liquidity, fractionalization of assets, somehow working also with the regulation, but in a way that is a little more flexible, let me put it that way. And they want in on the new trend, also because it's marketing. Yeah, so that is the answer, basically.
Got it.
So we don't really see much resistance.
Yeah. Well, that brings us to the end of this session. There's no more questions for now. I guess the only one which if you want to answer really quickly from Tiens, he's asking, will the NPIX DApp trade 24/7 initially? Depends on the assets. Some of these assets, a broker cannot really provide direct trading, so it just executes on somebody else's venue. So if these assets are traded immediately, then
we need to abide by the other venues. However, most of these assets are going to be backed by a security, and therefore, yes, we are going to see, for the most part, 24/7 trading and fractionalization. The underlying can be redeemed only during, only according to the rules for the redemption of these assets. But if we are good, then we won't see many redemptions, as a matter of fact. And those
Beautiful.
will abide by the opening hours.
There you go. Makes sense.
All right.
Thank you, Emma, so much for the time.